The number was 12,000. 12,000 years. That hit me before the scale of what it meant even registered. I wasn't looking for a lost civilization. I was reading a geology report, a dry, technical document about sediment stratification in southeastern Turkey. And buried in the footnotes, almost as an afterthought, was a reference to a site that shouldn't exist. A site that, if the dating holds, predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7 millennia. Predates Stonehenge. Predates, according to the timeline we've been taught since childhood, the very invention of agriculture. It sat there in the footnotes like a stone dropped through paper. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. And once you spend enough time with the evidence surrounding it, the questions don't go away. They multiply, because Göbekli Tepe isn't just a strange building. It's a strange building in the wrong era, surrounded by evidence of deliberate concealment, institutional friction, and a timeline that keeps getting quietly revised every time new data arrives. And that pattern, the revision, the friction, the burial, that's what this is really about. Let me tell you the official story first, because the official story is genuinely remarkable on its own terms. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd named Savik Yildiz was walking the hills near the town of Sanliurfa when he noticed something jutting from the soil, the top of a carved stone pillar. He reported it. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived the following year, took one look at the site, and reportedly said he was going to dig here for the rest of his life. He meant it. He kept that promise until his death in 2014. What Schmidt found, and what excavations have continued to reveal, is a complex of circular enclosures cut into bedrock limestone, filled with massive T-shaped monolithic pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall, some weighing more than 10 tons. The pillars are decorated with carvings of animals: foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, cranes, spiders, scorpions. Some pillars appear to have arms carved in shallow relief, suggesting human or humanoid figures wearing belts and loincloths. The level of artistic sophistication is not primitive. It is not crude. It is precise. The mainstream interpretation goes like this. Göbekli Tepe represents a ritual gathering site constructed by hunter-gatherers in the pre-pottery Neolithic A period, beginning around 9,600 BCE. These were mobile bands of people, pre-agricultural, pre-urban, who nonetheless organized themselves in sufficient numbers to quarry, transport, and erect megalithic structures. The act of organizing that labor, the argument goes, may itself have catalyzed the development of settled agricultural life. The temple preceded the village. Religion gave us civilization. It's a compelling inversion. And mainstream archaeology has largely embraced it, celebrated it, built careers around it. But the official story has a second act that gets far less attention. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Around 8,000 BCE, perhaps earlier, someone filled the enclosures with a massive amount of rubble, animal bones, stone tools, and debris. They backfilled these structures intentionally, covering them with up to 30 feet of material. They did not abandon the site because of climate or catastrophe. They buried it, on purpose, and nobody has given a fully satisfying explanation of why. That detail is usually treated as a footnote. To me, it's where the real investigation starts. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers don't behave the way they should. The oldest confirmed construction layers at Göbekli Tepe have been dated by radiocarbon analysis to approximately 9,600 BCE. That is not contested. What is contested, quietly in academic journals in the margins of conference proceedings, is the implication of those dates when stacked against everything else we thought we knew about human cognitive and organizational capacity at that moment in time. Here's the sequence as it was understood before Schmidt's excavations. Around 10,000 BCE, humans in the Fertile Crescent begin transitioning from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. The domestication of wheat, barley, goats, and sheep unfolds over the following centuries. Permanent villages emerge. Pottery appears around 7,000 BCE. Writing around 3,400 BCE. Monumental architecture, temples, ziggurats, massive civic structures, arrives with the Bronze Age civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 BCE. That's the staircase. Step by step, simple to complex, primitive to sophisticated. Göbekli Tepe does not fit on that staircase. It doesn't fit on the same staircase. It sits in a period when, according to the established model, humans were still primarily nomadic, still pre-agricultural, still lacking the social organization, the surplus food supply, the administrative capacity, or the specialized labor that monumental construction requires. Speaking of specialized labor, the quarry site for the Göbekli Tepe pillars has been identified. It's located approximately 300 meters from the main enclosures. Archaeologists examining the quarry found unfinished pillars still attached to the bedrock, as well as the clear marks of stone tools used to detach them, which sounds straightforward, except that the tools found at the site are flint implements, flint picks and chisels, and the rock being quarried is limestone. Limestone is soft enough to work with flint. The physics work. That much is uncontested. What is harder to account for is the coordination, the time investment, and the organizational infrastructure required to move 10-ton blocks using only animal hide ropes and human muscle power, and to do so repeatedly across centuries without any of the agricultural surplus systems or administrative bureaucracies we've traditionally associated with that kind of sustained collective effort. Some researchers have proposed that wild plant harvests in the region were abundant enough to support temporary gatherings. Others suggest the construction took place seasonally over many generations. These are reasonable hypotheses, but they are hypotheses. The evidence for them is inferential. The pillars themselves, by contrast, are not inferential. They are 10 tons of fact, which brings me to the carvings, because the carvings are where the pattern gets harder to wave away. The animal imagery at Göbekli Tepe has been catalogued extensively. What's less discussed in popular accounts is the sheer density and precision of the relief work. Some panels feature overlapping figures carved at different depths, suggesting an understanding of visual layering. The anatomical accuracy of certain animals, the flexed musculature of a boar, the wing articulation of a vulture, is not consistent with the output of a society usually described as emerging artistically. In 2017, a team of researchers from the University of Edinburgh published a paper in the Athens Journal of History suggesting that certain symbol sequences at Göbekli Tepe, particularly on a carved pillar known as the Vulture Stone, or Pillar 43, may encode a specific astronomical event. Their analysis argued that the imagery represents the position of stars as they would have appeared in approximately 10,950 BCE, during a significant meteor shower linked to what is sometimes called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Let me be fair to the mainstream response to that paper. It was met with significant skepticism. Several archaeoastronomers pointed out methodological concerns with the Edinburgh team's approach. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis itself remains controversial. There is not scientific consensus that Pillar 43 represents an astronomical record. But here's what matters. The debate exists. Credentialed researchers are spending time on the question. And the reason they're spending time on it is that the symbolic density of the carvings is unusual enough, organized enough, to invite the hypothesis in the first place. You don't propose that something is an astronomical record if it looks like random scratches. The proposal itself is a data point, and the pillar that generated this debate sat undisturbed underground for 11,000 years before anyone read it. Here's what I found while researching something else entirely. In 1963, a Turkish survey team conducting aerial photography of Anatolia identified a series of unusual ground formations approximately 15 kilometers from the Göbekli Tepe site. The survey was filed with the Turkish General Directorate of Antiquities. The notation in the filed record described the formations as possibly cultural in origin. No follow-up excavation was funded. That document sat in an archive in Ankara for 31 years. Klaus Schmidt never saw it before he found the site by other means. The timing isn't subtle. A site that would overturn established chronology sat beneath 30 years of institutional inertia. Not malice, not conspiracy, something potentially more ordinary and more troubling. A bureaucratic shrug. Speaking of institutional lag, the site was actually first visited by a University of Chicago survey team in 1963, the same year as the aerial survey, and was noted in their report as a possible medieval cemetery. The T-shaped stones were visible even then. The survey team moved on. I want to be careful here. Archaeological misidentification happens constantly. Surveys are time-limited. Resources are finite. The 1963 researchers were not negligent in any way we can document. But the pattern that begins here repeats at other sites in other contexts with enough regularity to be worth noting. The pattern is this: evidence that does not fit the established model tends to be classified as something that fits the model until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. The question isn't whether that's intentional. The question is what it costs. Let's talk about what's still underground. Schmidt excavated roughly 5% of Göbekli Tepe before his death. 5%. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2003 and updated surveys in later years suggest there are at minimum 16 additional stone enclosures buried on the site, in addition to the 4 that have been partially excavated. There may be more that the radar didn't reach. What's in those enclosures is unknown. The excavation pace since Schmidt's death has been slow. Funding cycles are inconsistent. The site has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which provides visibility but does not automatically accelerate excavation. As of the most recent published reports, the site is being excavated with what the lead archaeologists describe as methodological caution, which is archaeologically responsible and scientifically correct, and which means answers are coming but not quickly. There are also sites in the region that appear to be related. Karahan Tepe, approximately 35 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, was formally announced to the public in 2021 following excavations that began years earlier. It features similar T-shaped pillars. Preliminary dating suggests it may be contemporaneous with or older than Göbekli Tepe. Some of its carvings include a human figure emerging from the bedrock in a way that has no clear parallel anywhere in the archaeological record. Then there is Taz Tepeler, a Turkish phrase meaning stone hills, a broader regional project encompassing at least a dozen related sites, several of which are still in early excavation phases. The full picture of what was happening in this region 12,000 years ago is not yet visible. What is visible is enough to establish that something was happening, organized, sustained, architecturally sophisticated, that the dominant model of human history at that period did not predict. Maybe the model was incomplete. Maybe 9,600 BCE was not as cognitively or socially sparse as we assumed. Maybe the invention of agriculture was preceded by a longer, more complex period of proto-civilization than the material record, as we understood it, suggested. Maybe. But here's what I keep returning to: the burial. The deliberate, labor-intensive interment of these structures. Because whatever was happening at Göbekli Tepe between 9,600 and 8,000 BCE, someone decided at the end of that period to ensure it would not be easily found. They filled the enclosures layer by layer. It would have taken considerable effort, considerable time, and they left. And the site sat there, under the hills of southeastern Turkey, while every civilization in the recorded history of humanity rose and fell above it. The pattern I'm describing here isn't unique to Göbekli Tepe. That's what keeps me up at night. There is a site called Gunung Padang in West Java, Indonesia, where researchers have claimed to find evidence of subsurface construction reaching down approximately 30 meters, layers of construction that, if the controversial radiocarbon dates hold, would push human activity at the site to before 25,000 BCE. The claims are disputed with genuine intensity by other geologists and archaeologists, who argue the deep layers are entirely natural volcanic lava formations. The debate is ongoing. The site has not been fully excavated. There is the underwater site at the Gulf of Khumbat in India, where sonar surveys in 2001 identified what appeared to be geometrically regular structures beneath approximately 36 meters of water. The Indian National Institute of Ocean Technology announced the discovery with considerable fanfare. Subsequent analysis was contested. The artifacts recovered from the site, some researchers claimed they included worked wood with a radiocarbon date of approximately 7,500 BCE, were disputed on methodological grounds. The site has not been systematically excavated. It's underwater. There is Yonaguni, the submerged rock formation off the coast of Japan, which has generated debate since its discovery by Diverse in 1986. The Japanese government conducted official surveys. The conclusion was that the formation is primarily natural, a product of the regular fracture patterns in sandstone. Some researchers have argued certain features show signs of modification. The debate is ongoing. I am not telling you that any of these sites prove a lost advanced civilization. I want to be clear about that. What I am telling you is that each of these sites follows a similar procedural arc. Initial claim, institutional resistance, partial investigation, unresolved conclusion, slow fade from public attention. And in each case, the debate was not resolved. It was managed. The difference with Göbekli Tepe is that the evidence was too large and too well preserved to be managed indefinitely. Schmidt found it. He stayed. He published. He built an institutional infrastructure around the site that made it impossible to simply refile. And still, 95% of it is underground. Let me return to the human element because the data can make you forget there were people here. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe was not abstract. They were cold in winter. They had calluses on their hands. They watched the specific animals they carved, the foxes, the boars, the wheeling birds, and translated what they saw into stone with a deliberateness that took years to develop. They gathered in numbers sufficient to move the pillars. They fed each other while they worked. They had reasons for what they built that made sense to them. They had, almost certainly, a cosmology, a way of understanding the sky and the dead and the animals and what it meant to be alive, that was coherent enough to organize collective effort across what may have been centuries. And then they buried it. Whatever caused them to bury it, ritual completion, protection from a threat, cosmological necessity, the simple logic of a culture that built for the dead and then returned those buildings to the earth, they made a choice. And that choice preserved everything. The site that sits in those hills now holds more unanswered questions than any discovery I've come across in years of reading. Not because the evidence is absent. Because the evidence is there, underground, in 16 enclosures we haven't opened, in sediment layers we haven't analyzed, in objects that may or may not be sitting in storage in Sanliurfa waiting for the funding cycle to turn. The archive, in other words, is not closed. It's just not fully open. And the timeline we've been handed, the staircase from primitive to complex, from simple to sophisticated, from scattered bands to cities, that timeline has a 12,000-year-old crack running through it. Not because of conspiracy, not because of suppression, but because the Earth kept a secret that we didn't ask the right questions about until very recently. I don't have answers. I have a site, a burial, a date, and a pattern. The part one can't shake is this. If they buried it once, deliberately, thoroughly enough that it remained hidden for 11 millennia, what else is still under the hills? And once you sit with that question, you can't stop asking it.